Hey guys, tonight we're not walking into some fancy ballroom or a misty Victorian alley. No, tonight we're sneaking down the icy, groaning back staircase of a massive London mansion. Because you're about to become a servant, one of the unseen ones. The ones who cleaned, carried, shined and bowed, usually without getting so much as a nod. And let me tell you, it's not just exhausting labour, It's a labyrinth of regulations so absurd you'll wonder how anyone remembered them without losing their mind. And it all kicks off before dawn even breaks. Because your day begins in total darkness, before the first of countless bells chimes, before the mistress's eyelids even flutter, before the cook starts clanging pots. Your opening task: get every hearth blazing before the household so much as stirs beneath their down comforters. You won't buy this, but if you kindle a flame too slowly, the mistress might grumble that the atmosphere feels unhealthy. And yeah, that's an actual term they employed. Alright, before you settle in too much, go on and hit that like button and subscribe, but only if your soul agrees. And hey, drop a comment about where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. We've got an entire mansion of drowsy history buffs from every corner of the planet. Lower the lights, get that fan humming for some ambient sound, and let's ease into tonight's little journey. You snap awake in an icy garret bedroom where your exhale hovers in the space like mist. No buzzer, just reflex and the awareness that if you're tardy by even seconds, the master's shoes will still be frigid when he slides into them. You toss aside the rough wool cover, your soles touching the stone ground. No warmth for you. You're the person who starts them, recall? There's no moment to waste. You change in the blackness because lighting a match to ignite your taper would be extravagant. The residence must be illuminated from the lowest level upward, in quietness. You creep down service stairways so cramped and vertical they feel more like climbing gear. Your arm grazes cold brick. You're already anticipating the ash on your work dress, and the instant your digits will go frozen from gripping the coal container. Your opening destination is the parlour. It's absolutely silent and icier than the outdoors. You drop to your knees and inspect the grating. Yesterday's cinders are still tepid, but you can't abandon them. You rake them away with experienced efficiency, producing no more sound than a murmur. Then you arrange a wrinkled journal page, twigs, and, finally, coal, striking the flame with a hushed wish. A solitary puff of haze climbs, and the space radiates faintly amber. You advance to the following one, and the following. There are 9 hearths this dawn, and if even one refuses to catch, you'll receive a tongue lashing from the head housekeeper. Or worse, she'll inform her manager, because in this residence there's a pecking order, even among the ones cleaning the surfaces. Sometimes you question why the urgency to kindle flames that the household won't witness for another 60 minutes. But it's all about pretense. The household must descend believing the residence is perpetually cosy, that it awakens with them, that existence bends to their ease. By the moment the residence begins to rouse, your work dress is marked with ash, your finger ends tender from the iron grating, and your locks damp from perspiration. But you're not finished. Now it's moment to drag up the liquid 2 containers at a stretch for the sleeping quarters. The washing areas, if you can label them that, are freezing little chambers where china basins and jugs wait, spotless and chilled, requiring to be refilled once more. One of the oddest regulations. No matter how early you wake, you must never be observed to be winded. A gasping servant is an awkward servant, and awkward servants bring disgrace to the residence. You glimpse your image in the corridor-looking glass, only to recall, too delayed that you're not permitted to gaze into the master's reflection. That glass is buffed for him, not for you. And all this before morning meal. You glide through the washing room like a phantom, vapour climbing from the enormous copper pot that's been bubbling for 30 minutes now. The cook is already in a bitter temperament. She discovered the kitchen boy yawning and whacked him with a spoon. You don't dare produce a noise as you move by, transporting your tray of coal powder and hearth tools like holy artifacts. It's still not bright outside, but inside this residence the pretense of sunrise must come prematurely, as if the star itself understands better than to keep a Victorian lady delayed. Up the slim stairway once more. You proceed swiftly but soundlessly because the mistress is a delicate sleeper, and heaven help you if she detects your footwear or the splash of liquid. You halt outside her chamber, regulating your exhale, straightening your bonnet. Then a gentle tap, pause, silence. Then you carefully push open the entrance. The chamber smells like flowers and stiffness. Everything is arranged, decorated, and cushioned, and if it isn't, that's on you. You cross to the hearth, drop to your knees once more, and go through the ceremony you've now performed scores of occasions today. Cinders, sweep, twigs, coal. You kindle it rapidly, a spark of blaze grazing your knuckles. No noise, no scent, no haze. You shut the grating and proceed to the washing table, your limbs quivering slightly as you transfer warm liquid into the china basin. Exactly correct. Not too heated, not too chilled. If it's tepid, she'll sound the chime in a rage. That chime is your adversary. There are scores of them strung up in the service corridor downstairs. Miniature brass devices with rigid little markers that identify each chamber. They dangle in a sequence like execution ropes, and when one sounds, the whole arrangement jolts like a nerve network, snapping alert. A piercing clang, and a servant must arrive instantly, no matter what else they were handling. Once, one of the junior housemaids was midway through washing the children's chamber vessel when the chime rang for the front lounge. She freaked out, abandoned the vessel in the passage, and dashed. The head servant discovered it. She was terminated by evening. Yes, you complete with the mistress's chamber just in moment. The coals ignite, the basin steams, the bed drapes are still pulled. You dip slightly and step rearward, shutting the entrance without a noise. Back downstairs, you assist in arranging the morning meal table. Everything must be balanced. The bread holder must point eastward. Yeah, truly, one of the master's peculiarities. He thinks bread becomes mushy, more gradually that direction. You don't challenge it, you just follow. You grab a hasty crust in the washing room, a fragment of yesterday's loaf, chewed rapidly and plain. Your own morning meal won't arrive until much afterward. No one minds if your belly rumbles. It's considered undignified for a servant to seem too hungry for nourishment. Like a beast, one attendant once whispered. You've never dismissed it, and still the day hasn't truly commenced. The first official acknowledgement of the dawn hasn't even occurred. Shortly, the household will emerge like a gathering of rare fowl, scented, dusted, cursory, and you'll be required to become unseen once more, positioned in spaces, palms clasped, vision lowered, prepared to shift the instant a utensil taps against a teacup. There's an understood regulation among the earlier you're beginning, the tinier you must render yourself. By morning meal you transform into part of the fixtures. You vanish before the second bread reaches the holder. That's the genuine craft of Victorian assistance, not just waking prematurely, but deleting yourself entirely by the moment the resident stirs. And as the star finally glimpses through the parlour window, illuminating the buffed silver you devoted an hour rubbing, you recall, the household assumes the resident simply radiates like this. Obviously, they don't. Picture your frozen digits or your ash-marked sleeves. They never will. You position by the corridor partition, backbone erect, palms linked behind your rear and vision secured firmly on the floorboards. Not the household paintings, not the magnificent glass, not even the gleaming silver parasol holder that cost more than a year's earnings. Just the ground. Because glancing around means you're lazy. Glancing up means you're disrespectful. You've absorbed this lesson the difficult way. On your opening week, you grinned at the mistress as she moved by you on the steps. Just a courteous, closed-mouth grin, something you'd extend a stranger in the avenue. She halted mid-stride and glared at you like you'd insulted her beverage. "You believe this is companionship?" she whispered harshly. "Don't beam at me. This is not a performance hall." Her tone was cutting, but hushed enough to maintain pretenses. You devoted the remainder of the day in sorrow, buffing ornaments until your knuckles bled. You never grinned once more. That's one of the odder truths about being a servant in this residence. You can exist under the same ceiling for 20 years and still never be allowed to reveal your teeth to the individuals who compensate you. Your assignment is to be quiet, unseen, and above all, expressionless. A proper servant doesn't have a character. A proper servant doesn't scowl or exhale or chuckle. You must be motionless, like wall covering, or better still, atmosphere. The attendant has it even more difficult. He's towering, handsome, and in another existence might have been a performer or a combat champion. But here, his features are a covering, empty as a monument, his tone rehearsed to excellence. "Yes, madam." "Very well, sir. Immediately." He once admitted to you, muttered behind the storage entrance, that he maintains a count of how many days consecutively he can proceed without blinking before the master. His achievement is 12. You admire the cook. She gets to yell at the kitchen helpers, swear at the range, bang heavy cookware. Sound is part of her assignment. But for you, even singing to yourself while cleaning the window glass is risky. Once you discovered yourself mouthing the lyrics to a hymn while washing fabrics. The head housekeeper's silhouette moved by, and you stopped for a complete minute. You didn't exhale. She didn't mention anything. But afterward that day you discovered a mark of coal powder on your cushion. It's their method of reminding you you are never solitary. The regulation about quietness extends even to the stairways. The primary staircase, the broad one with the crimson velvet covering, is prohibited. You employ the rear one, the slim, winding, uncarpeted one that smells of aged timber and boiled greens. If you're ever witnessed on the front steps, even accidentally, it's considered a violation of propriety. One young serving girl was terminated for encountering the head servant on the incorrect level, her offence being too noticeable. You've absorbed to exhale differently, to blink more gradually. You maintain your palms clasped low, your features relaxed, and your mouth neutral constantly. Sometimes you dismiss how your genuine tone sounds, and if you're ever addressed, you maintain your responses brief. Don't suggest concepts, don't relay stories, never pose inquiries, particularly not about matters that don't involve you. The mistress once inquired if you had relatives in the rural area. You nodded. She inquired if your mother was still breathing. You wavered, uncertain if that qualified as too intimate, and responded she was, last I understood. The following day the head servant informed you not to entangle the lady in lengthy narratives. You never responded a personal inquiry once more. And yet the oddest aspect. The household doesn't even comprehend how harsh these regulations are. To them, it's simply how matters are. They trust quietness is respectability, that you favour it, that addressing a servant is a kindness, not a routine. You absorb swiftly. Courtesy is not for you. Dialogue is not for you. Display is not for you. You're here to assist, not to articulate. There are instances, fleeting ones, when you nearly dismiss the regulations, when something amusing occurs, like the washing helper slipping on a vegetable leaf and tumbling in a container of bubbles, and a chuckle climbs in your windpipe before you can halt it. But you suppress it down because even a giggle, if detected upstairs, can be considered disrespectful. Commotion in the service areas is a phrase you've detected before. It sounds amusing. It isn't. Every noise you produce is potential evidence. That groan on the steps, that thud of the coal container against the partition. All of it is registered. The mistress has hearing sharper than any gamekeeper, and she protests not just to the head housekeeper but to her visitors. "They're becoming careless," she once whispered over her accessory, as though discussing stray animals. One of them expelled air in the passage. Quite dreadful. It's not just about quietness either. It's about inflection. If you're ever compelled to articulate, it must be with precisely the correct gentleness. Not too strong or it's crude, not too hushed or it's viewed as defiance. A solitary incorrect note in your yes, sir, can label you as troublesome. That designation adheres, and troublesome girls don't receive proper recommendations. The head servant once provided you a caution wrapped in a story. "Do you understand why a chime rings so beautifully?" he inquired, consuming a fortified wine behind the storage entrance. "Because it understands its position and produces only the correct noise at the correct moment you comprehended. You perpetually comprehended. There's a harsh contradiction in the quietness you're compelled to maintain. Because despite never being addressed, you detect everything. You detect the disputes behind sleeping quarter entrances. You detect the lady sobbing gently into a lace cloth when no visitors are present. You detect the master's weighted steps down to the wine storage at midnight. You understand more confidences than any member of the household ventures to acknowledge, and yet you can't articulate of any of it, not even to each other. In the confined garret areas where the servants rest, quietness seeps in. Even there, rumour is hazardous. Conjecture is perilous. If one utterance is detected and traced back to your mouth, that's it. The dismissal. No caution, no compensation, just a letter stating your assistance is no longer necessary, and a curt acknowledgement from the head housekeeper. You'll depart with your chest and humiliation and nothing else. So the quietness transforms into a routine. It penetrates your skeleton. You halt singing. You halt exhaling. Eventually, you halt considering in complete sentences. Just movements, duties, sequences. When to bow, when to dip, when to disappear. Sometimes when you rest alert at night, gazing at the wooden supports overhead, you attempt to remember what your chuckle sounded like, or your tone when you weren't employing it to recite "yes, madam," or "very well, sir." It's an unusual kind of grief, lamenting your own noise. And in those hushed instances, you comprehend the quietness isn't just a regulation, it's a camouflage, a method of deleting you from the residence until you're nothing more than a form in the space of someone else's existence. But you comply. Because the most terrible noise of all, the one you dread more than any chime or reprimand, is the front entrance slamming behind someone who just forfeited their position. So you remain hushed, and you remain tiny. It's scarcely past sunrise, but your digits are already throbbing. You've just cleaned the brass stair bars, transported coals, and arranged fabrics that will be unfolded once more before midday meal. But now arrives the genuine challenge, the footwear. The master's footwear sit like monarchy atop a wooden stand in the footwear chamber. 6 pairs arranged in a sequence, each designated for a day of the week, though no one ventures to state aloud that he dons Thursday's footwear on a Tuesday just because he prefers it. They are towering, buffed leather with fasteners that radiate like gold, and your assignment is to make them mirror more than just illumination. They must mirror devotion. You slide on your work dress, one reserved particularly for buffing, and grasp for the rigid, bristled sweeper and a container of darkening paste. It's dense, pitch-like, and reeks of solvent and fat. You smear it across the opening footwear in gentle rotations, singing gently in your thoughts, never aloud. Each pair requires at least 30 minutes. It's not just the exterior. The bottoms must be cleaned, the heels must radiate. The interior must be swept with flour liquid so the leather remains supple and reeks refined. The flap must rest level. The cords must be flawless, never knotted, never twisted. If the master senses even a particle of debris inside, he'll hurl the footwear at the partition. And if you're unfortunate, you'll be positioned nearby. Once, another housemaid attempted to rush through her buffing. The following dawn, a visitor noticed a fragment of hardened paste on the arch and produced a jest over beverage. The assistants has grown sightless, have they? She was terminated before sunset. They stated she lacked dignity in her labour. But oh, what dignity it requires. You don't just buff footwear, you inhale existence into them. You picture each one as a relic, a symbol, an indicator of the household. Positioned dirt on footwear suggests disorder. Plainness means deterioration. You are the unseen barrier against humiliation. There's one pair in particular, the horseback footwear, that demand extra attention. Not because they're more delicate, but because the master dons them when he's sensing irritated. You've absorbed his temperaments through his footwear. If he selects those footwear, someone's receiving scolded today. You ensure they're buffed twice. And perpetually, you inspect your image. That's the concluding examination. If you can witness your own features in the curve of the leather, vision fatigued, locks secured, display empty, you understand the footwear are prepared. And you understand that once more, you've performed your assignment correctly. But don't assume you're concluded yet. There's the head servant's footwear too, and the visitor slippers, and mistress's fabric strolling footwear, which can't accept the paste, but must be swept with a particular glove produced of deer hide. She once blamed a housemaid of damaging the texture and declined to don the pair once more, then ensured the injury emerged out of the girl's earnings. You labour with the attention of a gem worker, but none of the recognition. These aren't objects of appreciation, they're just footwear, until they aren't. Until one sparkle of daylight off a heel produces a moving visitor whisper. Now, that's concentration to precision, and even then, no one commends you. You just advance to the following pair. There's a pecking order, even among footwear. The master's pursuit footwear demand one variety of buffing, the visiting footwear another. The most difficult, though, are the glossy leather evening footwear. You dread them. They must radiate like black stone and be so perfect they mirror candlelight from 20 strides. One mark, just one, and they state you've damaged the whole appearance. You once detected the master state he could evaluate a man's entire household by the condition of his footwear points. A plain toe means plain servants. He stated, rotating his liquor. So you position on the rigid stool in the footwear chamber, shoulders tense, palms coated in paste and filth, vision concentrated to detect the smallest imperfection. Sometimes your image in the leather startles you, not because you're startled by your features, but because it's the only moment you witness yourself all day. But here's the genuine deception. The footwear must appear flawless, but they must sense cosy. If they creak too much or squeeze or seem rigid, the master protests. They were inadequately maintained. You have to sustain the pretense that the leather simply complies with him, that his every stride is met with gentle, quiet ease, that he floats through his day on the effort of unseen palms. Even the cords have regulations. The knot must be balanced. The extremities must dangle uniformly, no more than a digit's distance past the openings. Once you secured them in a double knot out of routine, just to maintain them from unravelling. Massive error. He nearly stumbled on the steps and roared down the passage, bellowing, "Who ventured to cord these like a sailor?" You didn't admit. No one did. But the washing boy was blamed and received 3 days' earnings reduced. You slipped him half a roll from the storage afterward. He never inquired why. You commenced to understand the footwear-like characters. The fractured left bottom of the cultivating pair that perpetually reeks faintly of soil. The miniature cut on the heel of the black formal pair, proof of one too many strides out of a vehicle. You buff around that cut like it's holy, as if to repair it would be to delete part of the master's narrative. But here's the most ridiculous aspect. Despite all the duration you devote with his footwear, you've never once addressed the man. Not straightforwardly, not even to state good dawn. You understand his footwear dimension, his stride, his preferred footwear fasteners, but not the noise of his tone, when it isn't shouting commands across a chamber and he doesn't understand your identity. To him the footwear simply manifest each dawn, pristine, cosy, anticipating, as if they ascended onto the stand themselves overnight and exhaled with satisfaction. He never questions who buffed them, or what hour that buffing commenced, or how many frostbites you have from cleaning in the unheated footwear chamber. He just dons them and tracks dirt back in once more. Still you buff, because there's authority in the ceremony, because when you grasp the sweeper and employ just the correct force, it senses like you regulate at least one matter in the residence. The radiance is your mark, your quiet defiance, your method of stating, "I was here. I produced this flawless, even if no one ever understands it." You've buffed the footwear, arranged the fabrics, kindled the flames. But now arrives another holy principle in the unusual existence of assistants. Never, under any situation, are you to employ the front entrance. It's not just a recommendation. It's not just impolite. It's inconceivable. The magnificent oak double entrances with brass handles and lion head knockers, those aren't for your palms. They're for visitors, for deliveries from prestigious shops, for gentlemen with timepieces and mistresses with sunshades. The doorway is buffed regularly, but no servant's soul is ever meant to traverse it. Instead, you employ the lateral entrance, a simple, nearly unseen wooden entrance concealed behind the shrub, down a slim passage that reeks of vegetable leaves and coal powder. The strides are slippery with fungus. In winter, rodents dash along the partition in the darkness. But it's your method in and out. You could be ablaze, and still the head servant would inform you to depart via the merchant's route. There was once a young attendant, a fresh one, who ventured to stride out through the front one snowy dawn, limbs loaded with parcels. He was attempting to assist. He assumed velocity mattered more than presentation. Incorrect. The master witnessed him from the parlour and went rigid with rage. "Who is that?" He demanded a hearth cleaner. The attendant was departed by sunset. You absorbed then. Presentation is everything, and in this residence, servants do not belong where elegance commences. What's unusual is that the front entrance isn't just prohibited, it's legendary. You stroll past it every day, and yet never truly witness it. If a visitor taps, you're not the one to respond. That's where the butler holds court. He answers it dressed to the nines. Morning coat, ivory gloves, posture rigid as iron. Get spotted lingering anywhere near it, even on accident, and they'll brand you ambitious. That's the deadliest accusation you can face as hired help, wanting anything beyond your lot. You recall getting ordered to retrieve something from the entrance hall once. Some lost umbrella, maybe. You needed to walk across that carpet, only 3 paces. But during those 3 paces, every muscle locked tight. The crystal fixture overhead captured your image in the foyer looking glass. For one strange instant, you glimpsed yourself not as staff, but as company. Your fingers shook, and just that fast you spun around and bolted back toward the kitchen stairway, face burning, pulse hammering. Even the correspondence gets divided up. Mail for the household comes through the main entrance, arranged on sterling platters and delivered with ceremony. Mail for the staff tossed into a pine crate near the rear steps, bound with coarse twine and frequently torn open by nosy hands before you ever lay eyes on it. The contradiction. Sometimes your job requires cleaning the front entrance, buffing the bronze handle, clearing the panes, but always from outside, never from inside. You crouch there on all fours, scraping grime from a threshold you're forbidden to cross, your outline visible in the glass like a phantom. Sometimes, in your wandering thoughts, you imagine what it might be like to simply pull that door open and step through as though you owned the place, not served it. Not running, not hiding, just walking through with your chin up. But then somebody hollers for tea, and you abandon the notion like burning metal. The peculiar part is how the front entrance functions like a border between 2 realities. The refined candle-lit fantasy the household inhabits and the ash-covered truth you occupy. And despite moving between them endlessly, arranging morning rooms and collecting cigar ends, your presence must never register. You're the hidden machinery sustaining the fantasy. When company shows up, you strain to hear the crisp knock of the brass ring from the servants' passageway. That's your signal to stop, completely. The footman moves forward, flawless and soundless, pulls the door wide with rehearsed elegance and greets them with a dip so fluid it could be theatre. You stay invisible always. Your steps must make no sound. Your being must cause no disturbance. Sometimes when you're positioned in the hallway or wiping down a nearby staircase, you steal glances at their wraps, their sparkling pins, the way they examine the decor with disdain. This home you understand more deeply than they ever could. You've polished the railings they grip, you've removed the dirt marks their shoes left behind. And still, to them, you're merely atmosphere, or something worse. A shadow at the edge of their sight they choose to ignore. There's a story passed around the kitchen about a housemaid from an estate over in Kensington who got caught leaning against the inside of the main door during a break between supper courses and sweets. She wasn't behaving badly, just catching her breath somewhere out of view. But the mistress came back without warning, glimpsed her through the door's glass panel, and reacted with shock. Not over any wrongdoing, not because the girl had violated protocol, but because spotting her there destroyed the illusion. Staff aren't supposed to pause or show exhaustion or display interest, especially not near the entrance. That's the fundamental principle beneath every other principle. Preserve the performance. And so you adjust. You discover which planks groan near the main corridor and sidestep them. You commit to memory the route from washroom to landing that keeps you concealed. You maintain a lowered stance when working near the entryway, back bent, gaze downward. The mistress once commented that she appreciated how her residents seemed magically self-maintaining. That's your role, a wonder of vanishing. But you harbour no grudge against the door itself, not truly. The door is merely a marker, a dividing line. What bothers you, when you permit yourself to acknowledge it, is how readily people erase you from their awareness beyond it. On your infrequent afternoon off, when you switch into your nicest garment, dull grey fabric, still outdated by 3 seasons, and exit through the side passage for some fresh atmosphere, you pass by the front gate, observing other households' coaches pulling up. Women laugh, men light cigarettes. Everything appears altered from this vantage. You exist. You long to grasp the iron just to confirm it's solid, just to confirm you're solid. But you resist, because even out here you remain someone's employee. Even outside these walls, the restrictions stick to you like coal dust, and so you continue onward, beyond the entrance, back down the narrow lane toward the servants' door once more. The front entrance shuts behind you, untouched. The scent rises first. Roasted pig, fresh loaves and cream thick enough to cover the back of a sterling ladle. Your belly rumbles without permission. You've been standing for hours. Your previous meal a hurried bite stolen behind the storage room door before dawn. But now it's approaching midday, and the household is gathered for their meal in the formal room with linen squares and hushed conversation. You're beyond the partition, holding a platter, hoping the broth doesn't spill. It's among the most bizarre regulations of all. You make the dishes, carry the dishes, and dispose of the dishes. But you're not allowed to taste them, not even when the remnants get dumped back into the wash basin in a lukewarm, messy pile. Food for the staff arrives only once the household's entirely finished, and the reality is, by that point, it's scarcely edible anymore. You peek at the long servants' bench in the lower kitchen. It's empty, anticipating a handful of dented cups, a pitcher of liquid with particles drifting in it. That's what's waiting for you when the dome covers come off, the cream gets smoothed, and the visitors chuckle over currant spreads. You understand your position. You deliver from the left side, remove from the right side, and never meet the eyes of those dining. Your movements must be swift, inaudible, and your footfalls phantom-like. There's something especially harsh about how food mocks you, particularly on the Lord's Day, when the cut of meat is prepared so flawlessly that liquids stream crimson across the cutting surface. You detect the aroma in the passage, and it strikes your ribs like yearning, but you force down the sensation, physically. You can't consume anything until the formal room gets cleared, the china gets washed, and the silver gets shined once more. Occasionally there are scraps, fragments of chicken, wedges of tart with tine impressions still visible, custards deflated from excess spirits. They get dumped into a bowl, draped with a moist rag and pushed aside like remnants. That's your meal hours afterward, ice cold. The mistress maintains the staff should dine in rotations to keep structure. What she actually means is that you consume food in isolation, more times than not, perched at the extended bench facing a surface of pegs draped with cleaning tools and soggy coveralls. The meal is typically soggy, brew turned sour from standing too extended. And if anything fails upstairs, if anyone fumbles a serving piece or shatters a cup, you can abandon eating entirely. And still, even within this arrangement, there exist subtle hierarchies. The head butler consumes better than the chamber workers. He receives a portion from the untouched joint. He dines using his personal utensils. The kitchen woman gets initial selections, obviously. She's earned her privilege, they claim, with her scarlet forearms and explosive disposition. And you, the most junior, you receive what remains of what remains. Chilled sinew, the crusty end, if fortune smiles, a dollop of cooked fruit. One worker once risked taking a stone fruit from the pantry, merely one, because she'd gone unfed all day. The head woman discovered her in the act, and consequences came immediately. No provisions for 48 hours. You managed to slip her bread pieces when nobody watched. She offered no acknowledgement, simply chewed quietly with moisture on her face. That's another understanding. Appreciation stays unspoken. The genuine offence isn't the chilled provisions, it's the schedule. You've just invested the greater portion of 2 hours transporting dishes stacked like monuments, steadying sauce vessels with shaking wrists, and pouring wine without losing a single drop. And after the last visitor has touched their mouth and proclaimed themselves thoroughly content, you start the extended process of removal. Only following all that, following every final crumb has been brushed from below, are you given authorization to consume. But it's not simply about delaying, it's about your appearance while delaying. You must not pause in the corridor. You must not stare toward the formal chamber. You must not breathe too noticeably near the cooking area entrance. Even appearing famished gets discouraged. Improper, the mistress labels it. If you're discovered with your attention too focused on the roasted fowl or the berry dessert, it's labelled loitering, and that's unseemly. You're told that quality staff finds satisfaction in plainness, that a worker with cravings is a worker with designs. So you train your expression into neutrality, act oblivious to the cream filling, act deaf to the merriment bouncing from a space where you're never permitted to rest. You stay in motion. There's always a cloth to crease or an entrance to attend. When your moment at the servants' bench eventually arrives, the provisions are hardly provisions anymore. The sauce has solidified. The root vegetables have sagged into elastic clumps. The cooking area buzzes with dragging seats and striking tin vessels. But the atmosphere feels altered here. Nobody raises their voice excessively. Nobody objects. You consume what's present swiftly, with your face lowered. There's no ritual, no seasoned assault, no cloth squares. You eat because your frame requires energy, nothing beyond. Even your placement gets dictated. Chamber staff along one side, housemen the opposite, the head butler and kitchen woman. When they're inclined, claim the centre, exchanging quiet, knowing looks like they've climbed just far enough to forget how harsh the stew once tasted. You remember once questioning the washgirl what her preferred dish was. She regarded you as though you questioned what heavenly bodies tasted like. "Makes no difference," she replied. "You consume their leavings." And still, even here, regulations continue. You must not gorge. You must not request additional portions, unless invited. You must work your jaw softly. You must stand prepared to abandon your utensil and sprint the second a chime sounds. The provisions aren't your property. You're merely using them between duties. One worker once collapsed in the wash area. dropped straight into the cleaning pail. She'd consumed nothing in beyond a day, skipped a rotation due to tasks, then missed another due to discipline. The head woman grumbled that she craved attention. The kitchen woman snapped that collapsing was self-indulgence, and when consciousness returned, she expressed regret. That's the principle they never inscribe. But everyone understands your emptiness must never burden anyone else. And as you clean your dish bare and push it onto the washing stack, you sense it once more, that strange small pain not solely in your stomach, but in your ribs. The pain of existing amid provisions, soaked in the fragrance of searing flesh and sweet coatings, yet perpetually 2 hours and 1 station removed from the genuine article. Still, you force it downward, exactly like everything else. The chime startles you like a crack of lightning. Not from volume, though it resonates with a sharp metallic bite, but from its significance. Abandon everything. There's no bargaining with a chime. No, 1 minute. No, I'm occupied with something. A worker's existence pivots on a cable, and that cable runs directly to the sitting area, the reading room, the upper changing space, wherever fingers happen to pull a fabric cord connected straight to your alarm. You halt mid-scrub of a waste vessel, your palms wet, your covering drenched, and wait for the signal panel to flutter. It's fixed to the surface outside the cooking area like a line of markers. Each chime has a small brass label. Master's workspace, Azure chamber, eating hall, children's quarters. They all dangle in sequence, somewhat tarnished, somewhat threatening. The cable quivers. A chime oscillates. You scan for the nameplate. Mistress's parlour. That's your assignment. You don't even dry your palms. You fling the cloth aside, strip off your coverings, and dash. You climb the rear stairway 2 risers at once. You don't inhale, you don't blink. The regulation is absolute. Never leave a mistress waiting. A pause of even half a minute could trigger a frigid comment, or grimmer, a report to the head woman regarding your absence of preparedness. And preparedness in this residence is paramount. When you reach your destination, you tap lightly and move inside, vision lowered, breathing suspended. The mistress reclines on a settee. She doesn't glance up. She simply gestures toward the glass, the drapes. She states the brightness is dreadful. You acknowledge, approach the glass, and shift the thick fabric panels by an inch, no greater, no lesser. If you obstruct excessive sunlight, she'll claim the space resembles a crypt. Insufficient, and she'll insist the brightness has intensified her head pain. She doesn't offer thanks. She never offers. You retreat soundlessly downstairs once more. Someone's already assumed your vessel cleaning. You don't ask to reclaim it. That's the chime's authority. It cuts you from responsibilities mid-action, mid-consideration. You're owned by it, and it sounds frequently, occasionally for legitimate requirements. A serving piece, correspondence, a wrap, occasionally for fancies. Once the mistress rang because she'd lost her stitching pin, another occasion because she sensed a chill and wanted someone to examine the passageway for spirits. Not actually, naturally, but the atmosphere did seem strange. She mentioned you always appear, always, even when you're hauling fuel containers or crouching with a brush clenched in your teeth. Because the other option is graver. The other option is earning a reputation as sluggish. The cruelest aspect, the chimes are never mistaken. If one sounds and you reach your destination and nobody's present, or they mention, oh, I must have pressed it accidentally, you still apologise for your tardiness, for your bewilderment, for breathing. There's a hierarchy even among the chimes. The master's chime takes priority, then the mistress's, then the youngsters. If they all sound simultaneously, you respond to the master. That's the regulation. And if the children's quarters are ablaze while you're retrieving a warmed brandy vessel, well, let's trust the governess acts quickly. And, therefore, like a hound conditioned to a whistle, you listen for chimes. In your rest, you imagine them. You rise believing you've detected one, only to discover quiet and your own chest pounding. The chime is your deity now. It determines when you consume, when you shift, when you cease, And when, just once, it remains mute for an entire afternoon, you don't experience comfort, you experience fear. Because silence typically indicates someone's observing. Later that day, the chime sounds once more, 3 rapid rings grouped together. That pattern is unmistakable. It's the reading room, and you recognise what that signals. The master's returned ahead of schedule. You're already climbing the stairway before your thoughts register. You smooth your covering, wipe your palms on the material, and draw an extended breath at the entrance. The reading room chime is distinct, not because it resonates any stronger, but because it holds a certain weight. The master doesn't ring for minor matters. He rings because something's displaced, or because someone is. You tap and step through, cautious not to face him directly. He's positioned in a hide armchair beside the hearth, a vessel of fortified wine in one palm, a collection of documents in the other. He doesn't look up, just waves his hand towards the fireplace. "The fire," he says, going out again. You drop to your knees at the grate and start rebuilding it, quick but hushed. He grumbles something about bad ventilation and cheap coal, but it's not really about the fire, it's about power. You're just another moving piece in his household, like the brass clock on the shelf or the silver inkwell on his desk. And if one piece makes noise, it's on you. As you wrap up, you notice his boots by the chair, shined perfectly, as they ought to be, but one heel's damp. Rain, most likely. Still, you know he'll bring it up if you don't. "Should I grab those, sir?" you ask softly. He doesn't reply, just gives a nod. Without a glance, you lift them, hold them like they're fragile, and slip out of the room as if you were never present. But you were present, and that's the risk. Because every bell chime is more than just a call, it's a spotlight. And the more your name gets mentioned, the more likely someone's going to start whispering. She's losing it. It's the invisible timer of the servant universe. How many times they call you, how fast you show up, how few problems stick to your name. No actual chart exists for it, but everyone's aware. The housekeeper's aware, the cook's aware, the butler's definitely aware. One time, the bell from the guest bedroom rang 5 times in one afternoon. A new chambermaid had been given that room, young, jittery, desperate to please. By week's end, she was out. Too clumsy, they claimed. But it wasn't about being clumsy. It was about being visible. She'd been noticed too often, heard too often, summoned too often. She turned into a name, not a shadow. That's the secret. To work so smoothly, so perfectly that nobody registers you at all. So you drift like a phantom through hallways, paying more attention to the walls than the occupants. When the bell chimes, you're already moving. When it stays silent, you practice your stillness like a prayer. The waiting is a steady buzz beneath your skin. And sometimes, when the entire household's asleep, you slip down the back stairs and stare at the bell panel. Just stare at it. The little brass labels, the motionless wires, the tension that never releases them. You picture cutting a wire, just one. Picture silence. Not the stillness of anxiety, but the real kind, the kind that means escape. But naturally you don't, because tomorrow morning it'll ring again, and you'll answer it every single time. You've been standing since before the sun bothered to appear, and now your shoulders are screaming and your feet are throbbing inside your boots. You rest against the edge of the laundry table just for a moment, just for a beat. That's all. Then the housekeeper's voice slices through the space like steel. "Are you seated?" You jerk upright, like you've been caught stealing. "No, ma'am." You lie, though your legs still hurt from the brief instant they touch the bench. She squints at you. "There's no time for slacking," she says, and continues on without waiting for an answer. There it is, the unspoken but holy rule. You must not sit. Even when your fingers are scraped raw from washing linens, even when your knees pop from scrubbing the baseboards, even when you feel the spinning lurch of hunger and heat in your skull. You stand, you bend, you kneel, you squat, but you never sit. It's not just disapproved of, it's seen as disrespectful, lazy, a violation of your role. If the mistress were to walk into a room and see you sitting, even properly, even folding napkins, she might gasp like you'd shattered something. Once a senior maid was discovered mending socks while perched on the edge of a windowsill. She was warned, then moved to scullery duty for a week. Why? To remind her what labour truly means. You begin to learn how to sew on your feet, how to iron, shirts bent over, feet spread, one elbow propped against the side of the ironing board. It aches, your back hurts, your neck pounds, and your feet bloat like overripe fruit. But you do it regardless, because sitting is a form of rebellion. There's one wooden stool hidden in the corner of the scullery, the only seat permitted for servants who are injured or old, but it's hardly ever used. Nobody wants to be caught kneading it. Kneading, after all, is risky. Once you stopped to fix your boot, bending at the knee and resting for the shortest second on the lower steps. A younger maid spotted you and gave a sharp breath, as if you'd lifted your skirt or shattered a plate. "Better not let her catch you," she whispered, nodding toward the housekeeper's door. You straightened up and kept going. Even the word rest is suspicious. You don't say, "I need a rest." You say, "I'll handle the copper next." Or should I gather the linens? Anything that sounds like movement, like duty, like purpose. Because the second you hint at stillness, somebody else claims the space you abandoned, and that means you turn into the extra part. And yet the cruel irony is the mistress herself can spend an entire afternoon lying on a chaise, reading poetry aloud to her dog. The master dozes in the library after lunch with a blanket over his knees. The visitors collapse into cushioned chairs after every meal. And you hover near them, standing, always, your feet prickling with pins, your calves rigid as stone. You've become so accustomed to standing that even when you're alone, truly alone, you forget how to bend your knees. You catch yourself leaning against the counter for balance, feet rooted like tree trunks. At night, when you finally collapse, your body doesn't know what to do with the softness. You wake with stiff joints, as if punished for lying down at all. That's the silent lesson of this household. Ease is for the served, not the servants. There are chores that cry out for a chair, fixing stockings, stitching collars, repairing buttons ripped loose from impatient hands. But even in those quiet, meticulous jobs, you're expected to stand bent at the waist, the fabric pinched between your fingers, your spine slowly coiling like a ribbon. The pain arrives slowly, first your shoulders, then your back, then the dull buzz behind your eyes. The upper servants sometimes get stools, small, hard ones tucked in shadowed corners near the pantry, but they balance, not rest. A butler never sits in the master's presence. A lady's maid might be permitted to sit while fixing her mistress's hair, but even then, only if the mistress doesn't need the mirror or the brush or the scissors shined. And if she does, up again instantly. You once saw a rare act of defiance. A chambermaid with red hands and gentle eyes, maybe 17, dared to sit on the lower step between breakfast and lunch service. She was hemming a skirt, not gossiping, not slouching, just sitting. The housekeeper noticed her naturally, like a hawk spots a mouse. "You'll wrinkle your skirt," she snapped, though the real offence wasn't creases, it was visible exhaustion. "We don't sit while others stand." The girl stood, apologised. 2 days later, she was transferred to the laundry room, hotter, louder, and even less merciful. You've realised over time that the family doesn't just demand silence and service. They demand constant readiness. Sitting to them is the opposite of readiness. A sitting servant might delay. A sitting servant might lose their place. Worse, they might think. And so the rule stays enforced. Even the building reflects it. There are no chairs in the narrow passages, no cushions in the servants' hall, no stools in the linen closet or the scullery. The house isn't designed for your comfort, it's designed for your function. But of course, there are exceptions, theatrical ones. During Christmas or a birthday party, the mistress might announce, "Let the staff sit for a minute." She says it like a monarch granting mercy. And for one brief instant, You all sit awkwardly, stiffly, hands on laps, not quite sure how to arrange yourselves into the chairs you're never supposed to use. The moment is captured in their minds, a picture of generosity. See how kind we are, see how they smile when we let them rest. You smile naturally, you always do. But the chair is too narrow, the floor is uneven, and the very atmosphere makes it feel like you've borrowed something you don't deserve. Even in church, on Sunday, when you're marched into the pews behind the family, your seat is hard, short and separate. Not just physically, but spiritually. You are there but not included. And when you return home after a rare afternoon away, legs hurting, mouth parched, body heavy, you sit at last on the narrow bed in your attic room. But instead of relief, there's shame. A creeping whisper that says there's always something else you should be doing. That's the final cruelty. You spend every day forbidden to sit, and yet, when you finally can, you've forgotten how to feel comfortable doing it. Your body might stop, but your obligation never does. You've spent so long learning your place below the family that you sometimes forget there's a whole other ladder below you, a hierarchy among servants nearly as strict as the one upstairs. And like everything in this house, it starts with rules. Rules nobody explains to you, but which you figure out fast, usually the painful way. You're not just a servant, you're a low-ranking servant, a housemaid, which means you don't speak to the butler unless spoken to. You don't enter the still room unless the cook requests you, and you never ever take the same staircase as the valet unless there's a fire. Your first mistake was choosing the wrong stairs. You'd only just begun, green as grass, eager to make yourself helpful. You were hauling fresh linens from the laundry and took the servants' side stairs off the main hall. It was early. You thought nobody would be around, but at the turn you passed the butler, upright, silent, and radiating ice. He stopped. So did you. "You'll take the tradesman's stairs," he said quietly, not harshly, but that was enough, and it was sufficient. You turned, located the narrow, uneven stairs tucked behind the broom closet, and used those ever since, even when your arms were loaded, even when it was dripping inside from a leaky pipe, even when you slipped and bruised your tailbone. Hierarchy is everything. Here at the peak stands the butler, the master of the household beneath the family themselves. He manages the wine, the keys, the silver. His words are law. If he favours you, your existence is easier. If he doesn't, well, you'd better start searching for work elsewhere. Then there's the housekeeper, the iron fist of the household, dressed in rustling black and always smelling faintly of lavender and starch. She distributes your tasks, corrects your posture, and catches every flaw. Once she discovered a smudge on a doorknob and asked the whole hall, whose soul was as tarnished as the brass you all spent the afternoon polishing with vinegar and shame. Below her there's the cook. She commands the kitchen like a realm. She doesn't care what the butler declares, and she can ruin your whole week with a glare. You pray she's in a good mood, especially if you're due to pass her during baking. The last girl who interrupted a soufflé now works in the pantry alone. Then come the senior maids and footmen. Those who've lasted longer know the corners of the house and have the housekeeper's ear. They assign you the worst chores if they don't like your attitude. Toilet scrubbing, chamber pot duty, rinsing linens in freezing water while they fold hand towels in the warm drawing room. And finally, there's you, the bottom of the chain. You don't protest, you don't challenge, you just do. Because promotion is scarce, but demotion, that happens before the soup cools. Still, you learn to navigate the game. You smile at the right moments. You bring extra coal for the footman when he's hungover. You polish the bells so the housekeeper sees a reflection and nods. You don't want to climb the ladder, you just don't want to fall off it. The strangest part is how quickly this invisible hierarchy becomes instinct. You sense it in your spine before your eyes even register who's approaching, that quick step in the hallway. It's the under-butler, move aside, that slow, measured tread with a cane tapping on the floorboards. The butler himself. Lower your gaze, step back. Let him pass without making him adjust course by so much as an inch. Even the maid uniforms tell the story. The senior parlour maid wears black with a lace trim, her cuffs crisp, her apron embroidered. Yours is plain cotton, stiff and dull, with sleeves you've let out twice because new ones aren't provided. The cook has her own apron, a heavy canvas thing stained with decades of grease and pride, and nobody dares touch it but her. There's one chair in the servants' hall that everyone knows not to use. It's not marked, it's not labelled, but it's the butler's chair. It's older than half the stuff, worn smooth at the arms and creaky in the joints. Still, it has authority. You once saw the new scullery boy drop into it after a long shift, and the silence that followed was crushing. He stood up so fast he knocked over his tea. Nobody helped him clean it up. That was the lesson. But it's not all pettiness. This hierarchy also shields. When a guest yelled at a maid once, slurring words and grabbing her wrist, the footman intervened, silent but solid, just stood there, eyes steady, until the man released. The matter was never discussed openly, but the butler sent that same footman to run a personal errand for the master the next day. That was his reward. There's a kind of logic to it once you stop resisting it. A rhythm like birds in a flock. Everyone knows where to go, when to shift, when to stay still. Step out of time and you're scolded, but keep the pace and sometimes you're rewarded. A warm roll, a kind word, a look that says you're doing well. You begin to understand the unwritten rules. Don't outshine a senior. Don't gossip upward. Don't touch what isn't yours, even by accident. Never assume a favour earns another, and always listen more than you speak. You remember one rainy afternoon, soaked from running errands in the drizzle. You passed the housekeeper in the main hall. She paused, looked you over, and said, "You've not dripped on the runner." Good. That was it. Not praise, not warmth, but it lit something in you all the same. A moment of being noticed. A rare nod in a world that so often pretends you don't exist. And that's why the hierarchy holds. Because even at the bottom, you're part of something. Something vast and humming and orderly. You may be scrubbing floors, but you belong to the rhythm of a great machine. One that runs on silence, polish and deference, but runs all the same. Still, you sometimes wonder if you disappeared, truly disappeared, would the machine even stumble? Would anyone notice the empty spot in the servants' hall? Or would someone else simply step into your uniform, your duties, your name? You shake the thought away. There are stairs to scrub. You know which ones. The windows are already spotless. You know that you cleaned them yesterday and the day before and the day before that. But still the cloth is in your hand, damp with vinegar and lavender, as you polish the same pane of glass for the third time this morning. Because the rule is simple, if maddening: clean what's already clean. It isn't about actual dirt, not really. It's about appearances. The family must never think there's dust. Visitors must never wonder if the silver was wiped this week. Everything must sparkle with a kind of shine that looks accidental, effortless, as if the house simply wakes up that way, which means you're often scrubbing things that already gleam. Running a cloth along a stair, railing that has no fingerprint, wiping down a brass doorknob that's already shining like the sun. You've dusted the library shelves so often you know which books have never been opened. A set of poetry volumes, still stiff at the spine. A travelogue about Egypt smelling of paper and disappointment. The mistress once ran her finger along the baseboard of the dining room and found nothing. No soot, no speck, and yet she frowned. "I sense it's been neglected," she said. "Not see, not feel, just sense." So you spent the next afternoon on your hands and knees, scrubbing with lemon oil while your knuckles bled. There's a kind of madness in it. Polishing silver twice a day when it hasn't been touched in a week, ironing sheets that nobody's yet slept on, folding napkins with such precision that one misaligned edge is treated like a scandal. It's a dance between reality and ritual, where the labour matters less than the appearance of labour. Sometimes you wonder if the family even knows, if they understand that the gleam of the railing, the absence of smudges on a mirror, the crisp line in a tablecloth isn't the work of chance. It's you. Quiet, constant, relentless, and still the tasks pile on. The fireplace in the blue room is empty. It hasn't been used since spring, but the grate must be swept daily, the mantel dusted, the fire irons rearranged in perfect symmetry. The mistress says it keeps the spirits balanced. You don't ask what she means. You just sweep. The water pitcher in the master's dressing room is always full, even if he never touches it. You replace the water every morning. It's not about need, it's about order. It's about the house breathing in rhythm, and your job is to keep that breath steady even when it's absurd. You once spent an entire afternoon straightening the tassels on the drawing room curtains. There are 96 tassels. You counted. The housekeeper walked by once, nodded and said, "Make sure they hang with intent." You had no idea what that meant. You still don't, but you did it anyway. The worst part isn't the repetition, it's the invisibility of it. You clean what's already clean and nobody notices. If they did, it would mean you'd failed. That's the twisted logic of the house. The more perfectly you perform, the less anyone is supposed to see you at all. You once spent 3 hours polishing the dining table until the wood glowed like honey. Not a single person commented, but the next day, when the cutlery was laid half an inch too close to the edge, the mistress gasped. "This room feels slack," she said. That word stayed with you all week. Slack. As if one napkin out of line could drag the whole house into disgrace. So you double down. You begin to polish the backs of chairs, the undersides of spoons. You realign candlesticks that are already in a straight row. You dust the corners of picture frames nobody has touched since Victoria was still on the throne. Not because you must, but because someone might imagine they were dirty, and that's enough to condemn you. There's a term they whisper in the scullery, ghost work. It's the labour nobody sees, nobody measures, but which is expected all the same. A kind of spiritual cleaning, a guarding of appearances. You begin to think of yourself less as a cleaner and more as a preventer. You don't wait for dirt, you hunt its possibility. You remember once overhearing the butler speaking to a visiting valet. "They have a good girl for the drawing room," he said, meaning you, "keeps things unnoticeable." It was meant as praise, and you took it that way, even though it stung. Unnoticeable is a strange reward, like winning a race and being told nobody saw you run. Sometimes, late at night when the others are asleep, you walk the house in silence. You run your fingers along the mantel, not to clean it, but to feel it, to remind yourself that the shine is real, that you did that even if nobody else says it. You whisper it just once, "I did this." Then you go back upstairs and fold into the narrow bed as if the day never happened. And still tomorrow you'll do it all again. You'll rinse spotless basins, you'll press already stiff collars, you'll sweep dry hearths, shake out dustless rugs and replace the wax in a candlestick that hasn't been lit in weeks. Because that's the rule, that's the rhythm. Clean what's already clean, polish what's already shining. Maintain the illusion that this house is not tended but naturally perfect. And if you do it well enough, nobody will ever suspect you were there at all. You're 19. You've been in service since you were 14, and by now you know the truth, even if nobody says it out loud. You're not allowed to fall in love. Not openly, not privately, not at all. Because to love to court, to flirt, to write letters tucked in apron pockets is to risk everything. The mistress doesn't say this, neither does the housekeeper, but the rules are built around it like hedges of thorns. One wrong step and you're pricked on every side. There's no policy written on paper, but the expectation is clear. You live for the house, not for yourself, not for the boy in the stables with the soft brown eyes. Not for the footman who sometimes carries 2 trays instead of 1 just to pass your station. You've seen what happens when affection blooms where it shouldn't. You've seen what follows. There was a housemaid not so long ago. Clara. She was clever, quick, barely older than you are now. Everyone liked her. She sang when she worked, quietly, sweetly, and she had a way of walking past the butler's assistant that made her skirt sway just slightly too much. Nobody said anything, but the house knew. One morning, Clara didn't come down. The bells rang. The lady's fire wasn't lit. Panic followed, then fury. By noon she'd been dismissed. No reference, no farewells. Her trunk was left at the tradesman's door. You overheard. The cook muttered. She got caught giggling in the corridor. Fool girl. That was all it took. Giggling. That was enough to make the house decide she was unfit. Not for the work, but for the image. Because a servant with feelings is a servant who's distracted. A servant who writes letters in secret is a servant who might miss a crease in the napkin or a smudge on the window. And the worst sin of all, a servant who carries a child. The fear is everywhere. You feel it in the way the housekeeper stares too long at your waistline when you return from your half-day, in the way the mistress glances at you if she hears laughter that isn't hers. There's no grace for those who stumble, no maternity leave, no quiet room for rest. Just silence and then removal. That's why you're careful. When the footman offers you a biscuit from the tray, you take it without a word, eyes down. When the kitchen boy lingers near the pantry door with a silly grin, you keep moving. When you find a note folded into the pocket of your apron, unsigned, harmless, sweet, you burn it in the scullery grate before you're tempted to read it again. Because the house sees everything. Maybe not all at once, maybe not in a single glance, but eventually it always finds out. And if you make the mistake of imagining a different life, a cottage, a baby, someone who holds your hand instead of ordering it to polish silver, you're warned in 100 subtle ways that dreams are a kind of betrayal. You're here to serve, not to be wanted. And certainly not to want. It isn't just about romance. The rule extends further, deeper into every corner of your private life, if you can still call it that. You're not allowed to marry, not unless you plan to leave. And even then, permission must be requested. Granted, really, by those who think they own your time. You once asked the housekeeper, as delicately as you could, whether a former maid had married after leaving. She gave you a look so flat and cold it made your skin prickle. Married, she said, like the word tasted bitter. Well, she's someone's problem now. A problem. That's what you become the moment your life expands beyond the walls of this house. Because love, marriage, even family, they come with needs, with time off, with a risk of distractions, divided loyalties, whispered notes exchanged in linen cupboards. And the house wants none of that. It wants you wholly. Body, mind, hands, hours. Especially your hours. If you were to fall pregnant, it would be over immediately. No discussion, no sympathy, not even a goodbye. You've seen it happen. One of the scullery maids, barely 16, began showing she hadn't said a word, but the signs were there. The sickness in the morning, the looseness of her apron, the way she avoided the tight staircase. The cook noticed first, then the housekeeper. By the week's end, she was gone. Her bed in the attic was stripped before sundown, her name scratched from the duty chart. The family never asked. The mistress, when passing the kitchen that evening, simply said that little one was noisy, as if she'd been dismissed for chattering too much, not for carrying life in secret. The rest of you understood the real reason, and none of you said it out loud. Even if you were married, your place here would vanish. Married maids are seen as unpredictable, needy, likely to quit when babies come, or worse, ask to bring them near. And that is unthinkable. Children do not belong below stairs unless they're delivering coal. So if love does come, and sometimes it does, it must stay quiet, hidden in glances, in brushings of hands, in secret walks. When the house is asleep, it cannot bloom, it cannot ask anything of anyone, and it certainly cannot be spoken of. You once heard 2 footmen whispering after supper, joking about a cook's assistant who'd gone to work in a larger house, one where married couples were sometimes allowed in service together. They share a bed. Imagine that one laughed, and still she scrubs his drawers. You laughed too. Quietly. Bitterly. because that sounds like heaven compared to silence and aching and the fear of being found out. Sometimes in your narrow attic bed, you think of a life where you could hold someone's hand without shame, where you wouldn't have to glance over your shoulder before smiling, where your body, your future belonged to you, not to a mistress's schedule or a bell on the wall. But here your body is borrowed, your time is leased, your heart is simply in the way. So you keep it hidden, tucked deep beneath your apron, beating quietly, unseen, unspoken, unforgiven. The house is never quiet, not really. Even at night, even when the bells stop ringing and the fires have died down, it hums with movement. Footsteps creak along attic floors, pipes groan, the wind sneaks through keyholes and voices. Your voices whisper through the walls, not the family's voices. Theirs are trained, deliberate, meant to carry. Your voices are different, soft, fractured, passed in corners, behind doorways, under your breath. But make no mistake, what you say, what you do, what you feel is everyone's business. There is no privacy in service, no secrets that stay yours. You noticed it your first week when you spilled a little jam on your apron at breakfast. It wasn't even much a thumbprint's worth. You'd wiped it clean, changed aprons, and thought no more of it. But by lunch, the kitchen boy made a joke about sticky fingers, and the footman snickered. The housekeeper glanced at your hip that afternoon and raised one brow. The story had made its way around the entire servants' hall in under 6 hours. It's not cruelty, not always. It's currency. In a house where money is tight, favours are rare and advancement is nearly impossible, gossip is what people trade. Your mistakes become someone else's entertainment. Your embarrassments feed the invisible chain of whispers that binds the staff together and holds you in place. You learn to walk carefully, to speak even more carefully. If you're overheard muttering about the cook's temper or the master's laziness, it will find its way to the wrong ears. You might not even know who passed it on. Maybe the scullery maid who seems so sweet. Maybe the boot boy you gave your crust to last week. Everyone listens, everyone talks, but it's not just the things you say, it's the things you do. If you work too fast, you're showing off. If you slow down, you're lazy. If you're quiet, you're sneaky. If you laugh too much, you're distracted. There's no safe setting, no neutral. Even your belongings are fair game. You keep a small photograph in your trunk, your mother long before her hands curled with arthritis. You found it once, lying face up on your bunk, even though you swear you'd tucked it deep beneath your folded stockings. Nobody said a word, but the message was clear. You are never alone. Your uniform is checked for wear, your shoes for scuffs. The way you carry yourself tells others what kind of day you've had, and they'll watch for that file. It away. Use it. If you receive a letter, the others glance at it sideways, reading the curve of the handwriting, noting whether it smells of tobacco or perfume. They don't need to read the words to guess the story. And should something scandalous happen upstairs, a broken engagement, a crying fit, a slammed door, you'll know about it by tea. Not because you were told, but because someone saw something and passed it on before the tea had time to cool. In this house, nothing stays secret for long, not even your silence. You try to keep your head down. You try to stay out of it, but even that becomes suspicious. When you're too quiet, they wonder what you're hiding. When you're too still, they wonder who you're watching. The walls have ears, but the servants have eyes, and they're sharper than any mirror in the master's house. There's a game to it. You've learned the rules, even if nobody taught them. Always act surprised when gossip reaches you, even if you already knew. Never pass on a full story, only half. And if you make a mistake, deny it. Then help polish the brass until everyone forgets. The cook once told you that the real reason gossip spreads so fast is because it's the only voice the servants are allowed to have. We're not permitted opinions, she muttered while kneading dough. So we wrap them in stories instead. And so the stories fly. Who was seen leaving the wine cellar too late? Who spent a moment too long adjusting the master's collar? Who received a parcel with no return name? You, him, her, any of you. Even grief becomes gossip. You learn that the hard way. When your father died last year, you received the letter during your midday break. You remember your hands shaking as you unfolded it by the scullery window. You didn't cry, not really, just stared hollow. But that evening, someone told the footman you'd been moody all day, and by the next morning, the housekeeper cornered you with a look that wasn't quite kind. If you're too upset to focus, she said, do let me know. We can find a girl who isn't. She never asked why you were sad, just made sure it wouldn't interfere with the silverware. That's the other side of the gossip coin. It's not just entertainment, it's surveillance. A living network. If you're falling behind, if you're distracted, if you've broken something and tried to hide it, they will know, and they will whisper it forward. But sometimes it's not cruel. Sometimes it protects. Once, the mistress dismissed a maid for supposedly being filthy, a single stain on her uniform. But the rest of you knew the truth. The maid had caught the master in a state he shouldn't have been in. Wine, drenched, reaching for what wasn't his. She escaped barely, but the house turned against her, and the gossip that followed it told the real story, quietly, steadily, and within a week. The replacement maid was never left alone in that wing of the house. Ever. Because gossip in a place like this is also how you survive. It's how you know which footman to avoid, which bell to answer with extra care, which corner is safest for crying when nobody's looking. You never admit you rely on it, but you do. And so you listen and you speak just enough. Never the whole truth, never the full sentence. Enough to remain part of the current, not crushed by it, because to be talked about is dangerous, but to be forgotten even worse. You stand before the mirror in the hallway, holding a dusting cloth, watching your reflection for a beat too long. Not out of vanity, not out of disobedience, out of curiosity, because you barely recognize yourself anymore. A face pale from early mornings, eyes rimmed with fatigue, hair pulled back so tightly you sometimes get headaches. And always, always that uniform, stiff, black, severe, designed not to flatter, but to erase. The rule is unspoken but understood. Your clothing must conceal you, not adorn you. Everything you wear as a maid is selected to signal your position, to mute your presence, to remind everyone, especially yourself, that you're not here to be seen. Your dress is black, made of thick cotton or wool, depending on the season. It absorbs soot, hides stains, and shows your status in every fold. No trim, no colour, no individuality. The only variation is your apron. Always white, always plain, and always spotless. If it bears even a shadow of grime by the time you're seen upstairs, you'll be told to change. And if there isn't a spare, well, then you'd better make one look clean, fast. Your sleeves must be full length and buttoned, no wrists on display, no hands left idle. Your hair is pinned so tightly under your cap that you can feel it tug at your temples with every step. You've worn it like this so long that it stays in place even when the cap slips, and heaven help you if your cap does slip. The mistress once passed you in the hallway and tilted her head. "Tidy yourself," she said, barely above a whisper. It was more chilling than a shout. You hadn't realised one strand of hair had fallen loose by your ear. It was enough, because your hair is not yours in this house. It's a symbol. Loose hair is common, loose hair is inviting. And nothing, not a smile, not a curl, must ever suggest that you are available for anything but work. Even shoes are regulated. You wear plain black boots, rubber soles if you're lucky, leather if you're not. They blister easily, especially in the rain. You learn to line them with scraps of linen, but don't let anyone see you do it. Servants don't complain of feet. The cook says only dancers and aristocrats do that. The footmen, of course, have it different. Their uniforms are tailored, immaculate, gold-trimmed if the family's wealthy enough. They are the visible servants, the ones meant to impress the housemaids. Though you're meant to disappear, even your undergarments are inspected. The housekeeper checks them during wash rotation. If they're frayed, she frowns. If they're new, she questions how you afforded them. You can't win. There's a pecking order, even when it comes to washing clothes. You've taught yourself to mend your own hems by flickering candlelight, to patch stockings with threads salvaged from thrown-away fabric, to stretch your only 2 dresses last season's by keeping your gestures contained, your marks few, and your crying hidden. And the peculiar part is, you start accepting it, that you're meant to appear like this. That looking unremarkable is the same as being virtuous. That attractiveness exists somewhere else. In the parlour, draped on the visitors, inside the picture frames, along the staircase. Definitely not on you. There's a sort of folklore about looks in domestic work. The more unnoticeable you appear, the more protected you are. Good-looking maids invite problems. Good-looking maids draw eyes. And drawing eyes, as you've discovered, isn't fortunate in this household. It's a risk. You recall Sarah, complexion like fresh milk, locks the shade of autumn leaves. She wasn't trying for beautiful. She just existed that way. Her outfit never hung properly on her, regardless of how modest it was. The mistress took a dislike to her immediately. Too rosy, she once whispered to the head servant. Too spirited. It was irrelevant that Sarah laboured diligently, that she creased linens flawlessly and never once fumbled a platter. She grinned too easily. Her gaze was too lively. She was released before the month ended. Unsettling influence was the expression they employed. Following that, you adapted how you carried yourself. Shorter strides, softer. You kept your expression neutral. You tightened your mouth before stepping into a space. Even when you received compliments, you never appeared satisfied. You once caught the head servant telling the chief footman that particular one's suitably unmemorable. You experienced an odd sense of comfort. But it isn't solely about looking plain. It's about sameness. You mustn't eclipse the rest, nor seem beneath them. If your garment is too fresh, there will be inquiries. If it's too worn, you'll be informed you diminish the household's appearance. You must navigate a fine line, presentable, unseen, unobjectionable. When fresh girls show up, you can identify the errors immediately. They position their cap too far backward, or they select the finer pinafore, the one with the superior trim. They might even wave their bangs or attach a pin on their neckline. You don't speak up, you simply observe. The household will instruct them before long. Even your fragrance is controlled. No cologne, not even aromatic cleanser. You cleanse with harsh soap and dress in stiffening agents. If the mistress detects the slightest hint of herb oil, or heaven forbid, floral essence, she'll pronounce it cheap, and the head of house, if he notices it, you'll be blamed for courting notice. You're permitted to keep herb packets in your undergarments naturally, because she enjoys the aroma on her bedding, but not on yourself. There was talk once of a servant who applied colour. Just a touch, just sufficient to mask the ashen cast of exhausting shifts. She was terminated. No forewarning. They claimed she had pretensions, that she considered herself superior to her station. That was sufficient. A hint to her face, a whisper of pigment vanished. And so you transform into what they require you to be. Neat, secured, fastened, faded. You learn to regard attractiveness as peril, distinctiveness as a fracture in the structure. You cease checking the mirror, aside from verifying your cap. But occasionally, just occasionally, you glimpse a likeness accidentally in the curve of the tea kettle, in the buffed wood of the railing. And you recall the person you were previously, the dark garment and the pinafore and the quietness. She's still present, behind your vision, but she understands better than to reveal herself. The mistress's foundation garment rests on the mattress, like a test. You don't reach for it initially. You never do. You pause respectfully until she signals. Just a movement of the hand, that's the authorization. Then you advance, gaze lowered, grip firm. Because clothing the mistress is not merely a chore, it's a ritual, and it arrives with regulations so severe they might as well be Holy Text Rule 13. The mistress's intimate garments are untouchable, not yours to speak of, not yours to scrutinize, and absolutely not yours to fumble. You release the foundation garment cautiously, careful not to upset the trim at the borders. You extract the silk undergarment from its herb-scented container. Her hosiery are already positioned across the footrest, coiled, not creased, so they won't wrinkle. Everything carries a faint smell of stiffening and cologne, like a wardrobe that considers itself superior. She raises her limbs languidly as if she's uninterested in the ceremony. But it isn't disinterest, it's authority. She understands how private this is, how near your grip comes to her flesh, how your breathing must remain shallow so you don't disturb her with it. She once released a servant for laboured respiration during fastening. You recall, you were the one dispatched to arrange that person's belongings. You assist her stepping into the foundation garment, the silk wrapping around her like protection. She elevates her jaw and waits while you commence pulling, one drawer at a time. Steady, not rough, snug, but not severe. You've discovered the ideal tension across months of throbbing fingers and hushed amendments. If you draw too gently, she exhales and labels you feeble. If you draw too forcefully, she inhales sharply and grips the bed frame and then informs everyone at the midday meal that the staff nearly collapsed her breathing. She offers small observations. As you secure, you'll need to redo your neckline again. Or has the kitchen worker been permitting you to sample the dairy? Nothing outright vicious, just pointed. A needle prick here, a snap of contempt there. Her words are sharper than any of her decorative pins. You respond with a gentle yes, mistress, and another pull of the cords. The foundation garment is secured, the clasps fixed. She rotates to examine herself in the looking glass. You retreat backward, fingers clasped, unseen once more. But that foundation garment, that's the representation of everything, of domination, of regulations, of limitation. So severely restricted that you question how she even draws air, and yet somehow it's you who experience breathlessness, not her. Because if anything falters, if a cord snaps, if the silk rips, if she discovers a slight crease in the undergarment, you will be the one accused, and you will be the one released. It's occurred previously. You recall the account clearly. A personal servant, not in your household, but one nearby, was dismissed after the lady claimed she botched the securing, claimed the foundation garment had been drawn asymmetrically, that it caused a slight mark near the ribs. A mark, understand, the dimension of a fingerprint. The servant was dismissed within 60 minutes. She'd laboured there half a decade. That's the frightening aspect. These underclothes, these silent silk-wrapped ceremonies possess influence. Beyond the porcelain, beyond the silver. A blunder here isn't just about errors. It's about closeness. You're the one who observes her exposed spine, who secures the concealed clasps behind her gowns, who understands which slip elevates her hem precisely so. And because of that, you're both relied upon and mistrusted. You're never to discuss what you observe, never to reference that the mistress has a spot near her side, or that her hosiery elastic is deteriorating, never to mention that her undergarment has been repaired thrice in the identical location, or that the master's neckband carries the scent of perfume she never applies. You swallow these details like pebbles. Once a servant murmured an innocent remark, just a small anecdote about the mistress's difficulty with her foundation garment, mentioned at the conclusion of an extended shift when the strain had finally broken. She didn't specify identities, she didn't chuckle too loudly, but the kitchen boy relayed it forward. The head servant learned, and by dawn that person's belongings were in the entry area. She didn't even complete a beverage. Even when circumstances deteriorate, you must voice nothing. One sunrise, while assisting the mistress into her intimate clothing, you detected a welt just beneath her upper back, a shadowed mark. You stopped for half a heartbeat too extended. Her gaze captured yours in the looking glass, frigid, evaluating something. "The issue?" she stated, tone like refined crystal. "No, mistress," you answered. You dropped your vision, secured the concluding clasp, voiced nothing. Because even sympathy is threatening here. You're not intended to perceive her as mortal, and she absolutely doesn't perceive you as one. You are her image, attendant, her additional set of fingers, her quietness sewn into cloth. And when she is attired, completely secured, fastened and refined, she never expresses gratitude. She merely departs, leaving powder and cologne. You collect the clothing she abandoned, still heated, still faintly aromatic. You arrange them with care you don't experience. You store the foundation garment in its compartment, align the borders of the undergarment, rewrap the hosiery in paper, and then you cleanse your fingers, not because they're soiled, but because they've contacted something you weren't expected to experience anything regarding. Because intimate clothing are untouchable, and emotions are not. The initial time you heard it, you assumed it was humour. A domestic worker, yourself, being requested to organise produce by dimension, to groom the edge on the window dressings with a particular ivory implement, to position the house shoes at precisely 30-degree measurements by the mattress. But it wasn't humour. It was the third weekday. That's the aspect no one cautions you about. The master's impulses are laws in themselves. They may not be recorded in the staff register or declared in the corridor, but when the master determines something should be executed a particular method, it must be executed that method perpetually, without inquiry, without forgetting. One day he determines his publication should be heated before reading the following. The utensil in his beverage cup must rest horizontally across the dish. Not upright, horizontal. And so every sunrise, after you heat his publication against the flame and re-examine the utensil's measurement thrice. Because if you don't, he'll realise. He always realises. The master isn't vicious, at minimum not in the manner the mistress is, with her slicing glances and murmured accusations. His cruelty is softer, constructed of anticipations, so specific they approach insanity. You recall when he returned from his summer in the spa town with an affection for green vegetables, not to consume. He couldn't tolerate the flavour, but to observe. He preferred them arranged in his workspace, organised by dimension from briefest to longest, the verdant surface gleaming in the dawn illumination. No one understood why, no one questioned. Your responsibility was merely to fulfil. For 6 consecutive days you organised green vegetables. Then, without notice, he proclaimed them crude and never referenced them again. He has preferred volumes that must be cleaned but not accessed. Preferred hand coverings that must be maintained but not utilised. He once commanded the dining space floor covering to be rotated 90 measurements before supper, and then complained in bewilderment when it sensed different the following day. And heaven assist you if you neglect any of it. One of the servants once buffed the master's writing vessel on the first weekday instead of the second. It sparkled, she was satisfied, but he observed, stated, it sensed, disrupted. She was relegated to chamber vessel responsibility for 2 weeks. You maintain a mental catalogue of his inclinations, you protect it like valuables. His tobacco must be positioned marking outward. His footwear cords must be threaded beneath, not above. His writing surface must be positioned precisely with the border of the floor covering, no more than 2 finger breadths from the perimeter. You once measured it 14 occasions in succession, to be certain. Because his impulses are not just practices, they're examinations, and failing one means you're no longer valuable. Occasionally, late at darkness, you jest about it silently inside your own mind. You picture him waking in cold perspiration because the spreading knife was a hair's breadth too distant to the left. You envision him inhaling at the appearance of 3 fruits instead of 4 in the produce container. But you never grin when you arrange the surface. You measure, you modify, you commit to memory. Because the master's impulses may alter daily, but the consequence for neglecting them that always remains identical. It isn't just the peculiarity of his demands, it's how abruptly they manifest. The master never declares them with clarification. One instant you're cleaning the window ledge, the following you're being informed that from now on, the writing pad must be rotated to slanted after each application. It permits the surface. To respire, he mutters, as if that creates any logic, and so you execute it. Because reasoning doesn't matter, only compliance. He once determined his bathing liquid must be precisely 104 measurements Fahrenheit, not 102, not 105. He transported a measuring instrument back from the department store just for this intention. The personal attendant now invests 20 minutes each sunrise modifying taps like an experimenter, adding cupfuls of heated and chilled liquid until the small mercury marker settles in just the correct location. If it doesn't, the master returns the bathing liquid. Yes, returns it as if it were a meat dish. Occasionally you think he's executing it just to remind you who's commanding. You recall the period of the verdant fruits? He observed them at a neighbour's supper gathering, flawlessly circular, all arranged in a crystal container. The very following sunrise he commanded the equivalent. From then forward, the verdant fruits in the central corridor had to be buffed to a brilliance, and rotated every 2 days so they'd never discolour on one surface. The mistress even began examining them herself, gazing down the corridor as she passed, her vision scanning for a lacklustre spot. You never consumed one? No one did. They were for observing, not sampling, and it wasn't only him. The visitors occasionally transported their own ceremonies. There was the military officer who demanded his cushions be expanded at precisely 4 of the hour, regardless of whether he was utilising them, and the bereaved relative who declined to consume anything separated into triangular shapes. You created that error once with the bread. She inhaled as if you'd presented her poison. None of it is intended to be challenged. It's all woven into the larger enchantment of the residence. The concept that this location is a realm separated, governed by invisible principles you're anticipated to absorb as if by natural ability. So you do. You transform into an authority in absurdity. You understand which utensil belongs where, which wrap must be positioned on the mattress when the climate turns damp, which direction the house shoes must orient when positioned at the base of the master's mattress, forward sections out, rear sections touching. And yet, despite all this exactness, the regulations can reverse on you in an instant. One afternoon, after months of following every impulse to the character, you neglected to realign the workspace seat. After cleaning, it was displaced by a measurement. Just a measurement. The master entered, scowled and whispered, "Something's displaced." He moved about, modified, frowned. The remainder of the day the residence was strained. No melodies played, no one remained in the corridors. The accusation had no identity, but it located its target. You invested the evening in the cleaning area, buffing platters that were already brilliant, questioning yourself how a single displaced seat could unravel a person's whole perception of arrangement. But that's the reality of it. These impulses aren't really about green vegetables or floor coverings or bathing liquid. They're about authority, about evidence that the realm can still be organised, precisely so that while the exterior is chaotic, the capital, government, obligations, illness, this residence remains flawless, dominated, and You're the one who creates that fantasy achievable, one flawlessly positioned utensil at a time. There are circumstances you observe in domestic work that you were never intended to observe, not because they're concealed, but because they exist in that peculiar intermediate space between murmured controversies and circumstances politely disregarded. And the extended you attend, the more you comprehend. Some confidences must be transported to the burial ground, but the regulation is straightforward, absolute, and seldom voiced audibly. Voice, nothing. Recall everything. You transport the mistress's correspondence upstairs, the ones enclosed in substantial ivory containers with penmanship that isn't her spouse's. You don't examine the identity. You don't even glance at the closure, but you detect the aroma. Citrus blossom. You detect it on her hand coverings too when she returns from her charitable excursions. And you detect the alteration in her tone when she produces melody to herself, returned from a transport journey that extended too long and circled nowhere specifically. The master understands. Naturally, he understands. But he voices nothing, not to her, not to the chief footman, just to the flame, as he gazes into it longer than he previously did, consuming brandy with a hushed rage that never overflows. Only once did he discuss it afterward. Too much fortified wine, he whispered to no one specifically. At minimum, she's cautious. And so you transform cautious too. You clean his ash containers after he's departed, locate the match containers from establishments he claims he doesn't frequent. You ventilate his vests that transport the aroma of other perfumes. Floral plant once, flower another occasion, and once tobacco and sweetener, an aroma that didn't belong to any woman. You arranged that vest a little more gradually than typical, but still voiced nothing, because the consequence for voicing isn't always termination. Occasionally it's focus. And focus, in a residence like this, it can destroy you more rapidly than any falsehood. You've adapted to observe without observing, to detect without responding. When the residence is hushed and footsteps traverse the upper level long after midnight, you rotate your countenance to the barrier. When a beverage container is shattered in a secured space and no visitor is explained for, you gather it up without a syllable. Once a household servant in a neighbouring property voiced too freely about the mistress's younger sibling, about his consuming, his obligations, his abrupt vanishing. The household sued her for false accusations. She hadn't even stated it publicly, just to another servant. But intelligence escaped, and suddenly she was threatening. You observed her once, afterward labouring in a lodging establishment on the border of the municipality, her fingers crimson with harsh cleanser, her pinafore marked with pork grease. She didn't examine you and you didn't gesture, because shattering the hush, even when you're correct, means you forfeit the one circumstance that matters in domestic work more than ability or forfeiture. Devotion. Your recommendation. Without it, you're nobody. No household wants a person with a history of discussion. Unreliable, they'll state, too acquainted, and that's it. Entrance after entrance closed. So you maintain their confidences. You enter them deeply, not because you desire to, but because you must. Because the residence recalls who voiced, and it never neglects. You once questioned an older servant, long since toughened by the years, if maintaining so many confidences ever burdened her downward. She didn't respond, just examined you over her needlecraft and stated, if I documented it all downward, the sheets would ignite. Then she returned to stitching, like the consideration had never transferred between you. That's the circumstance. Every domestic worker in this residence is a mobile collection of the glances transferred at supper, of the struck entrances after visitors depart, of the weeping muffled behind decorated handkerchiefs. You observe it all, you experience it all, but you voice nothing because that's the price of reliance in a location that never grants you any. You understand the kitchen worker has a container concealed behind the grain sacks, not because she informed you, but because you once observed her grip tremble after a scream from the mistress over a scorched dessert. Later that darkness, the aroma of brandy occupied the cleaning area like admission. You understand the chief footman composes correspondence he never dispatches, extended ones, inscribed in an exact grip, occupied with identities no one references anymore. You located the sheets discarded in the fireplace, only partially scorched, the markings still readable in locations. Once you observed the syllables, I should have departed when she perished. You never questioned who she was. You've observed a footman slip into the garden with a mistress's servant long after restriction. You've detected the muffled disagreement that followed days later behind the fabric press. When she murmured, you stated you intended it. He didn't answer, just departed with his jaw rigid and vision lowered. And yet none of this exists, not officially, not in the domestic workers' register, not in the vision of the household, because domestic workers do not observe, they do not recall. They are containers through which the residence operates. Presentable fingers, expressionless countenances, sealed mouths. Until, naturally, a confidence must be recalled. That's when they suddenly anticipate you to recollect everything where the mistress's necklace was last observed, whether the visitor from the third weekday had a crimson coat or an azure one, whether you detected any absent brandy, whether the master's penmanship appeared peculiar, and you do recall, naturally you do, but you respond cautiously, only what's protected, only what maintains you on the compensation. Because the instant your recollection transforms too acute, too valuable, you transform a hazard, and the residence doesn't tolerate hazards for extended. So you transport the confidences silently. They establish in your skeleton like powder in the window dressings, hushed, substantial, nearly imperceptible. At occasions you question what would occur if you did document it all downward just once, not for vengeance, not even for fairness, just so someone somewhere would understand that behind the buffed floors and secured draperies, you were present, you observed, you understood, you persisted. But you never do, because in domestic work the price of reality is banishment, and the price of hush is continuation. You're curved over the basin, scrubbing trim necklines with freezing liquid when the head servant passes by and clears her throat passage. Just once. That's sufficient. You align instantly. She grants you an examination, then signals vaguely at your skull. Correct your locks, you acknowledge. Yes, mistress, even though you're uncertain what's incorrect. But you'll discover before long. Because here's another regulation you've arrived to adapt, inscribed into the cloth of every respectable residence. Your locks must be imperceptible, not just orderly, not just presentable. Imperceptible. It must never attract focus, never gleam, never liberate, never propose anything other than discipline and submission. One strand displaced and suddenly you're disorderly. Too many strands and you're vulgar. The cap assists, naturally, that rigid, starchy circumstance with its fastenings and creases. You secure your locks rigid beneath it every sunrise, wrapping and rotating until your scalp stings and your temples pulse. No waves must appear, no wisps around your ears. The rear of your neck must be exposed. You secure it with direct pins until it maintains like protection. And yet, somehow, it's never quite sufficient. You recall unfortunate Edith. She had substantial shadowed waves, attractive ones. From reality be informed, though we never dared state it audibly, no matter how securely she plaited them, a few would emerge loose by afternoon. The mistress took one examination at her one day and stated frigidly, "Your appearance is commencing to mirror your class." Edith didn't persist the period. It doesn't matter if your locks are presentable. Doesn't matter if it's maintained thrice a day with acidic liquid and animal bristles. If it moves, it's disturbing. If it gleams, it's unsuitable. You once caught a visitor state, "I do desire the staff wouldn't radiate so much. It's terribly diverting." Over beverage, she was discussing a parlour servant's locks capturing the sunlight through the glass room aperture. The parlour servant was relocated to the cellar storage 2 days later. So now you take additional caution. You moisten your maintenance implement before you arrange it so nothing escapes away. You rotate it more rigid than comfort permits. Some persons even scrape theirs backward with cleanser, compressing it like wax. One scorched the terminals with a flame once, just to halt the frizz. The head servant reprimanded her for the odour, not the technique. And here's the most peculiar aspect. The mistress herself has locks arranged for volume. Loose movements, brilliant pins, ornamental combs, the sort of appearance that requires hours, and a personal servant. Her vanity surface is scattered with ointments, oils, and French aromas. But she examines you, cleaned plain with a countenance constricted from rigid plating, and seems comforted, as if your discomfort validates her refinement. The communication is explicit. Her locks are to be observed, yours are to be eliminated. Even on your half day, when you're permitted to proceed into the municipality in your finest, you reconsider before releasing your plat. What if someone from the residence observes you? What if your likeness in the bakery aperture drifts backward through the domestic worker grapevine? So you maintain it secured always, just in circumstance. Because in this residence, a loose strand is not just a strand. It's a menace. There's a specific shame in being detected for something as minor as locks. It's the sort of error you don't comprehend until it's too late. Until someone constricts their vision at you across the parlour, or disapproves behind your rear in the domestic workers' corridor, you'll invest the remainder of the day questioning, was it that loose wave? The brilliance near my temple? Did my cap displace when I curved to position the flame? And you won't question, because questioning would validate the suspicion you've observed the hushed consequences. A relocated position, a frigid gaze from the head servant, a pinafore that doesn't get returned from the cleaning until someone else's identity is stitched into it. Occasionally the regulations seem like they're not about decency at all, they're about eliminating gentleness, gentle tones, gentle fingers, gentle locks. Everything about you must signal discipline, limitation, domination. If your body dares to display signs of nature, of being alive, untamed, mortal, it's amended, compressed, concealed. You recall being a child in your mother's dwelling. Before domestic work, she would groom your locks gradually, with heated fingers and a gentle rhythm producing melody, something tuneless. It hurt occasionally, but she'd always express regret after a pull. You wept once. Not from the hurt, but because you understood it wouldn't persist. Now no one grooms your locks but yourself, and never gently. You've adapted tricks across time. A thin ribbon fastened under the cap to maintain it in position. An additional pin positioned behind your ear, concealed in the crease. At darkness, you plait your locks into a single extended plait so it won't tangle in your slumber, but you never maintain it downward. Not even in the upper level when you're alone, not even on your day dismissed. It doesn't seem protected anymore. You once caught the mistress's young relative discussing a servant in another residence. She displayed her locks downward on the landing. Can you picture? Appeared like a wild circumstance, like something from a painting. The rest chuckled. You didn't, because for you, that wildness has consequences. You occasionally dream about it, though, that your locks descend free, that you proceed down the corridor without a cap, the air from the accessed entrance capturing each strand like a flag, that someone observes you not with assessment, not with contempt, but with acknowledgement. And in the dream, you don't retreat. But in the waking realm, you arise with the sun, rotate it backward securely, secure each pin like protection, and prepare once again to be disregarded. Because attractiveness here is not a blessing, it's a threat. And your locks, like everything else, belongs to the residents. You're proceeding down the corridor with a stack of pressed napkins when he rotates the corner. The master. His footwear echo gently on the floorboard. You stop just for a heartbeat and advance quickly to the direction, dropping your vision. You execute everything correct. But he pauses for an instant. The hush extends. You experience the burden of his vision on your dropped skull. You don't examine upward. You mustn't examine upward. Then, without a syllable, he continues past you, and your circulation doesn't commence beating again until he's beyond sight. That's the regulation. Vision on the floor. Always. Not just when you're reprimanded, not just when the household passes. Always. Examining a gentleman in the vision is not only disapproved upon, it's considered bold forward, a sort of social trespass, even if accidental. You've observed what occurs when the regulation is shattered. There was a parlour servant once, lively visioned, young, too fresh to understand better. She examined upward when the mistress's offspring spoke to her. Not flirtatiously, just naturally, like a person responding to a person. That was sufficient. Intelligence reached the mistress within the hour. The head servant didn't even wait until supper. She withdrew the person aside and stated, "Do you assume this is a performance establishment?" The person didn't weep, but she didn't create it through the month either. You adapt early that vision contact means self-assurance, and self-assurance is not for you. Your responsibility is to merge, to transform part of the wall covering, moving when required, pausing when anticipated, never attracting focus. If the household neglects your identity but recalls your usefulness, that's a compliment. So you train yourself to observe footwear instead of countenances. You adapt to interpret moods by the speed of footsteps, the sound of exhales, the movement of coat edges. You can inform when the mistress is in a foul temperament by the sharpness of her heels on the stairs. You can inform the master's half intoxicated when he commences producing melody to himself in the corridor. But you never examine upward to observe their vision, and they seldom examine downward to observe yours. There's a peculiar sort of sorrow in it, this regulation that demands you be imperceptible because it doesn't just maintain you protected, it maintains you minor. You commence to curve without detecting. You move through spaces, sideways, backward, always glancing downward. The floor transforms familiar. You understand every knot in the wood, every mark on the runner. Even when you're complimented, well-executed or efficient person, you're not expected to encounter their vision. Just acknowledge, curtsy, advance away, and if you ever are examined at directly, truly examined at, it means something is incorrect. You once shattered a dish in front of a visitor. He rotated toward you, not with anger, but surprise, and for the initial time, his vision encountered yours. He appeared shocked to observe you had a countenance at all, as if domestic workers are intended to be. Forms, shadows, fingers without owners. That glance haunted you more than the shattered porcelain ever did. You detect, across time, that even among yourselves, this regulation persists. At initial, you assumed it was just nervousness, but now you observe it explicitly. Domestic workers seldom encounter each other's vision either, especially not in front of superiors. It's a practice baked in by hierarchy. The cleaning servant glances away when the household servant passes. The footman avoids the kitchen worker's vision unless summoned. You locate yourself executing it too without thinking. It's not about shame, it's about continuation. The only location you occasionally dare to elevate your vision is in the upper level at darkness, when your outfit is arranged neatly at the base of the mattress and your cap is dismissed and the only illumination is from a single flickering flame up there among the constricted mattresses and drooping surfaces. You might secure vision with another person and grin just a little, just sufficient to remind each other you're actual. The lower level in the radiance of chandeliers and the burden of exposure, anticipation. You examine at the floor you've adapted to navigating by peripheral vision. You can interpret the mistress's mood by the measurement of her jaw. You can inform when the master's about to voice by the movement of his hand covering. You experience more than you observe, anticipate more than you question, because to question would mean elevating your countenance, and elevating your countenance would mean everything. The irony is acute. The household anticipates excellence. Surfaces positioned to flawlessness, spaces rotated out as if by enchantment. But they cannot bear to observe the individuals who create that flawlessness achievable. Their comfort relies on your elimination, and occasionally the regulation hurts in methods you didn't anticipate. You recall the day the mistress's child descended on the stairs. You detected the weep, acute and abrupt. You were nearest, closer than the caretaker, and you proceeded, instinctively capturing the boy before he tumbled further. He gripped to your pinafore, weeping. You examined at him, naturally you did, and he examined backward, expanded, visioned, relying. But then the mistress arrived. She seized him from your limbs, expressed gratitude without warmth, and then stated, so frigid, it seemed like frost, "Do not examine at my child, as if your vision had soiled him, as if your vision was something to cleanse away." You curved, expressed regret, rotated away. Later that evening, you were relocated to buffing the stair railings. Hushed labour. Consequence without the identity. You still think of that child occasionally. The method he examined at you, like you were present. The method your circulation stung not from the mistress's accusation, but from the method she eliminated that one mortal instant. That's the threat of examining upward. You observe too much. And worse, you permit yourself to be observed. So you return to the practice. Vision downward, tone gentle, movements minor. Because examining upward might remind them you have a spirit. And in this residence, a domestic worker's spirit is not part of the furniture. There's a particular art to vanishing while standing precisely in the middle of a space. You dominate it with time. The exact measurement of your upper limb when arranging downward a platter. The partial advance backward after presenting a correspondence. The method you maintain your respiration when a visitor passes too near, not to be disregarded, precisely. That would suggest you'd made a mistake. But to become so ordinary, so thoroughly functional and unmemorable that nobody truly notices you, that's the objective. Because in Victorian domestic service, being unseen isn't merely a way to survive, it's mandatory. And nowhere does that show itself more clearly than when the household receives visitors. You can always tell when guests are expected. The atmosphere shifts throughout the house. The footmen shine the silverware until their hands are raw. The housemaids scrub every floor on hands and knees. The cook mumbles like someone under a spell. The housekeeper transforms into part of the bell mechanism itself, materializing in door frames before anyone thinks to pull the cord. You disappear. Not in the literal sense, naturally. You're present everywhere, inside the drawing room, starting fires in the entrance hall, wiping away dust that can't be seen upstairs, erasing marks from the floor using vinegar and a threadbare rag. But nobody should see you. The instant the first visitor enters, you must blend into the surroundings. Not a domestic worker, not a young woman, not even someone with a name. Simply hands, motion, existence without being noticed. You're trained to move without sound, to breathe softly, to exit a space before your silhouette extends too long. It's not merely manners, it's about standing. A visitor who mentions spotting a maid could destroy more than your employment. She could damage the household standing, and the mistress won't tolerate that. You recall one night when the drawing room overflowed with people, laughter floating up like vapour from teacups, gloves thrown carelessly across furniture, the scent of cigar smoke threading through the air. You remained against the wall, motionless as pottery. The mistress clicked her fingers once and you responded immediately, tray in hand, bearing perfect. Not one visitor glanced your way. But someone did remark as you departed. How remarkable! I hadn't even realised she was present. That counted as praise, and you accepted it like an honour. The strange part is, your education in being overlooked runs so thoroughly it starts to influence your very thoughts. You begin anticipating requirements before they're voiced. You understand when to crack open a window before anyone experiences discomfort. You swap out an empty glass before it's observed. You top off an inkwell before the gentleman requests it. You don't require appreciation. You require quiet, the beneficial kind, The type that indicates you've performed your duties so perfectly they scarcely recall it was accomplished. But the demands don't stop when the visitors depart. Sometimes it intensifies. The mistress inspects the rooms afterwards with keen senses and keener vision. She searches for crumbs, for cushions out of place, for abandoned visiting cards. You're required to make the house look untouched, as though 30 people never tramped across the carpet or spilled spirits on the hardwood or nudged a china ornament askew. And all of this happens while remaining invisible. There's even a specific path you must take when attending to needs. Never cross through the middle of a space. Never move behind where a guest sits. Never raise your voice beyond a whisper. If two visitors are conversing and you happen to hear something scandalous, you act as though you heard nothing. If someone falls ill and requests assistance, you help without showing feeling, then disappear. Because in this household, being noticed is risky. You're present to attend, not to observe. And yet you do observe. You witness more during one evening than the mistress might imagine in 4 weeks. The hushed disputes behind closed doors, the shaking hands of the young teacher when her intended visits, bearing traces of rouge on his shirt. The way the gentleman's tone softens when he addresses the French visitor with slightly excessive warmth. But these observations aren't yours to claim, not in any official capacity. You hold them like unseen cargo, never discussing what your vision gathers. It's both a weight and an odd form of influence. There's an ancient jest shared in the servants' sleeping area. If the walls possessed hearing, they'd request the footman to say it again properly. But it isn't truly amusing, because you are the walls. You are the hearing. And still you must stay silent. Forever. One time, one of the junior maids revealed something, merely a thoughtless remark about a visitor's footwear, she believed. Nobody was listening. She'd vanished by sunrise. No correspondence, no notice, simply absent. You catch on fast. Keeping quiet protects you. Being unseen preserves you. And when you finally collapse into your attic cot that evening, your limbs throbbing and your shoulders tired from unseen toil, the silence up there speaks louder than everything. You rest awake watching the plaster above, questioning what it feels like to move through a space and be acknowledged not as an error or a shade, but as a human being. But down below, downstairs, in those sparkling chambers, you're a spectre with roughened palms, an exhale that cleans silver, arranges pillows, holds confidences, and if you manage it correctly, nobody even realizes you exist. You wake to chimes, not birdsong, not daylight, not a soft tap at the entrance, but the jarring, piercing sound of the servant's summons bell ringing through the passage like a decree from above. It's the morning bell, and not meant for you, because this morning the employers requested a particular tray delivered to their chamber, which means you must wake before daybreak, before the kitchen girl starts the cooking fire, before even the cock crows in the yard. You drop your feet from the mattress, already chilled. The sleeping quarters above the servants' dining area contains no hearth, only covers, vapour, clouded glass, and stillness heavy as molasses. You walk carefully across the groaning planks, fasten your dress by flame light, and start your journey down into the depths of the residence. Morning meal, like everything else in a Victorian home, involves hierarchy and precision, and the servant's morning meal, that's somewhat of a bitter irony. Your belly rumbles as you walk past the cooking area, where the chef, who rose even earlier than yourself, pounds dough onto a surface with the intensity of a tempest. Lord, the aroma of cream and expanding bread drifts through the space, but none of it belongs to you yet. First you must arrange his service, and you execute it like machinery, steaming coffee in the silver vessel, ideally browned bread, a gently cooked egg in its tiny holder, seasoning, utensil, cloth napkin, the newspaper pressed flat so it doesn't rustle too much. You buff the utensil once more even though it's already shining. You adjust the napkin, you crease it twice, then you transport it up 3 levels without losing a single drop. Because if you perform well, recall the footman who stumbled last winter. 1 splash of tea on the gentleman's vest and he was reassigned to the animal quarters by midday. He shovels waste now. No stress. The gentleman doesn't offer gratitude when you arrive. He never has. He opens the paper with the slightest sound, which signals your moment to withdraw, but not too quickly. You must stay close by, just beyond view, in case he requires something. Another slice of toast, writing supplies, a different seat. So you position yourself in the corridor between the glass and the tall timepiece, tracking each sound like a sentence. Soon enough, the bell sounds again, a quick chime, and you enter once more with a fresh cloth, though you understand it isn't the cloth he desires, it's the milk. Or maybe he's reconsidered the egg. Regardless, you fetch what's requested with nothing more than acknowledgement and a soft "yes, sir," and still you haven't had food. Below, the servant's morning meal sits on an extended wooden surface. Tepid oatmeal, day-old bread, tea made from leaves so ancient they could be parchment. The footmen are already finishing their portions by the time you come back, and you meet the gaze of the housemaid who manages the upper bedchambers. She offers you an understanding expression, and she understands what the gentleman's early morning meals do to the daily flow. But there's no opportunity to stay. The bell chimes once more. You look toward the head servant, who hardly raises his eyes. He's already focused on organising the day's beverage selections. The operation continues without interruption, and you rejoin the pattern, stomach partially filled, thoughts already on what comes next. Because now arrives the actual breakfast, the one in the dining chamber. This is theatre. Dishes must be heated. The silver cover over the meat must show not one streak. The table covering must drape at exactly the proper distance, no more than 2 inches from the ground. Blades and prongs must line up as if measured by instrument, and the toast must be presented standing in a holder, never piled. God forbid anyone's bread makes contact. You're positioned to stand behind the mistress's seat this morning, not because you're preferred, quite the opposite, but because the previous girl stationed there coughed once during attendance and was switched out. You inhale through your lips. You maintain your position as if your backbone is a steel beam. You react to gestures, not speech. And when you serve the tea, you angle the vessel with precisely the proper movement, fluid, not too rapid, and never dripping on the dish beneath as you complete it. All around you discussion flows. They're talking about some matter, financial figures perhaps, or who was observed with whom at the previous week's outdoor gathering. You don't pay attention, not truly, but one statement breaks through. I do appreciate having properly trained household staff. It's as though they aren't even present, and you understand they aren't addressing you but discussing you directly before you. You don't react, you don't grin, you don't fade because you've already perfected that skill. Afterward, once the household has scattered, you enter the kitchen and consume the remainder of your oatmeal cold. Someone abandoned a piece of meat, and you claim it without hesitation. It's among the only minor comforts in this existence because you've learned something peculiar. You don't simply attend to breakfast. You are the breakfast, shined, arranged, presented for evaluation, then dismissed the instant the following dish comes. But you don't shatter. You simply transport the service back down the steps. Your movements delicate, your expression empty, and your belly still partially hollow, always prepared, always observing, always wanting. There's a phrase among the senior housemaids that's shared only after darkness falls, when the gas fixtures are extinguished and the atmosphere is dense with stiffening agent and hidden truths. A servant's value is judged by how little trace they leave. Not marks, not sounds, and definitely not grievances. And so your last duty today, the most crucial, isn't shining metal or adjusting cushions. It's guaranteeing your presence never disturbs the household's fragile equilibrium, not even accidentally. Because tonight brings the seasonal evaluation. Not of the residence, though that too must sparkle like an exhibition, but of you. You're to be displayed like furnishings, standing straight, wordless, appropriate clothing, pressed pinafore, immaculate footwear darkened to a reflective finish, nails clipped, hair secured and your expression blank. You're not to talk unless questioned. You're not to question anything whatsoever. The head housekeeper walks the servants' dining area like a commander before combat, correcting neckwear, fixing sleeves, even wetting a digit to clean a mark from a kitchen boy's lobe. She arrives at you finally. Express pleasure, she instructs quietly, but not excessively. You're not having fun. You're privileged to be present. And so you comply. You form a row at readiness when the gentleman and mistress come down into the servants' dining area for the evaluation, an uncommon ritual crossing of realms, worlds. You maintain your vision lowered. They proceed deliberately, acknowledging some, disregarding others. The head servant recites your identities and roles like your objects in an inventory. Cooking assistant, junior footman, washing staff, upper floor maid, children's helper. When they arrive at you, the mistress's attention holds a moment beyond normal. She examines your footwear, your hemline, your palms. Then she tilts ever so subtly toward her spouse and states, "That one's quite acceptable. A dependable girl." You sense a spark of something unusual. Not satisfaction, not even comfort, just a subdued feeling that your preparation succeeded. And then the instance passes. They continue on. You return to background status. When the evaluation concludes, the formation breaks apart like vapor. The chef goes back to her bubbling vessels, the footmen remove the gas fixtures, the head housekeeper withdraws, without speaking, and you, still holding your palms in ideal form, at last breathe out. But the evening isn't finished. There are boots to blacken for the morning, correspondence to organise, embers to tend. Every sign of the day must be removed by midnight so that the residents may awaken tomorrow as if it were created fresh. You discover yourself in the washing area again, sleeves pushed to your forearms, cleaning a copper vessel that someone burned during midday meal. The darkened base comes away gradually, stubbornly, as if it objects to your effort. A torn fragment of vegetable peel adheres to the edge. You brush it away as you labour. A brief recollection emerges. One of your first days present, when you would sing while cleaning, earned you a harsh correction. Domestics not to fill the residence with their sounds. The senior maid cautioned, "We are reverberations, not melody." You cease singing after that. But tonight, in the stillness just before the chimes are prepared and the flames blown out, you permit yourself a solitary, almost inaudible tone. Not the melody, just a sound. It hovers in the atmosphere for an instant, unheard by everyone, and then it vanishes. You climb to your attic chamber when the entrance clock strikes 10. Your feet have blisters, your nails edged with ash, your back tense from exertion. But the clothing remains spotless, your identity unspoken, your errors, if there were any, undetected. You settle onto the slim bed and pull the rough covering to your neck, and for the first instance all day, you are solitary. There is no chime to sound, no footfalls overhead, no requirements to satisfy. Just the groan of the timbers, the hiss of air, and the steady, gentle pulse of your own circulation. You stare at the ceiling above. The residence rests. And so finally do you. Hush. You've accomplished sufficient. The metal is buffed. The services are cleared. The entrances are all secured firmly, and the flame in the drawing room has diminished into soft orange embers. Tonight you've travelled every corridor of a realm long vanished. You've sparked candles, smoothed cushions, transported services, and dissolved into entryways like a phantom. You've experienced what it means to be unnoticed and essential simultaneously. And now you needn't do anything further. Allow your back to ease just slightly. Let your breathing fall into cadence with the ticking of some ancient tall clock far off in a remote passage. The gentleman won't summon you tonight. The head housekeeper's footsteps won't resound down the stairway. The chimes are all quiet. Only you now, and calm. Picture the hush of that servant's attic. Picture the roughness of wool coverings, the gentle gusts of wind through loose window glass. The muffled noise of the city beyond, but only faintly. There's no washing area to clean, no pinafore to press, no evaluation to endure. Only this instant and the comfort of rest that's been deserved. Let your thoughts wander now like footfalls down a corridor that leads nowhere specific. You've attended enough for one day. Let the residents recede. Let slumber have its moment.